Hi, I'm David Dunlop. Right now, you and I are in my studio in Wilton, Connecticut. And here, it's a big working studio because this is where I make my living as a painter and do workshops, Zoom workshops through daviddunlop.com. First, I do a program, and that has to do with art history, visual perception, the biology of perception, how our eyes work, how the cortex works, and how we construct images, culturally, how we have our certain biases for certain images, how we have a Pictionary, all of those sorts of things, what our cultural history is that affects our vision and on. Now I can show you a board, for example. I'll start with a board kind of like this. Here's one. And this one's going to take people back to the 1500s with a unicorn tapestry, a detail inside of Da Vinci, and this is to show just for flora. So we've got icons of flora, how we think of icons, whatever we're doing, we always impose the icon, and then we try and reconcile it with the photons that are bouncing on the neural tissue in our eye, but the brain is making the picture. And so we go from these traditions, this menu that you and I have, and that menu varies culture to culture. You can broaden the menu. If you're a really good musician like Yo-Yo Ma, you got a big menu. So we start here with a unicorn tapestry, in this case for flora, go back inside with some chiaroscuro effects. This is Da Vinci's painting of the Madonna in the Rocks, on to Watteau, but then I cross back across the Atlantic to 1831 Edo, Japan, and we've got Hokusai. And talking about, because Hokusai is going to be this big influence on all of Impressionism, the painters like Van Gogh are going to copy his work. We're going to see how their changes of the design, the graphic nature of the design, even the change of the elevation of horizons, that all changes coming right out of Asia, which we can trace to China. I particularly am in love with Sung Dynasty painting, Fan Quan and others. But I'm just here just showing you this, and for the flora, because here are irises. We go back to chiaroscuro of Da Vinci, back to, and now here I'm with a Fauvis painting, and I trace the tradition into abstract expressionism and Freudian, because we've gone through these different revolutions in human history, the Copernican revolution, the Darwinian revolution, and then this unconscious revolution with Hermann von Helmholtz, this physicist, saying, we make unconscious inferences when we're seeing. And how does that work? And then we have Freud and Rokitansky and so many others that are going to follow that. And people in Vienna at that moment, like Egon Schiele, are going to say, yes, it's through exaggeration. We pay attention to exaggeration, which we also got from the Asian painting. So we got the exaggeration of color, and then it just continues with Fauves. And then I give some examples of my own work through that process, and also and I try to keep it gender balanced. So here we are with abstract expressionist. So we go from this form of expressionism to abstract expressionism, and now we're in the 1950s, and we're still dealing with flora, but this anticipates, let's say, Anselm Kiefer. And with Anselm Kiefer, we get super expressionism, political points of view, and as well as that thing that happens with especially that Darwinian, Freudian period, where we start to say, wait a minute, what's the inner meaning? What's the meaning beneath? What am I saying passively, unconsciously? What am I inferring? And so we get that, especially in abstract expressionism. This is Joan Erdley, who was a Scottish artist, and here's a contemporary London artist, Eileen Hogan, and I talk about their process. Just to give you a taste of some of what I would do in a class, take you through art history for whatever the particular subject was, and consider also the vision and how our eyeballs move 4 to 3 times per second. That means what? That means there's a different focus point 4 to 3 times per second. So is there a single focus point in a painting? No, that's a myth. And so demythologizing some of the cultural art history that we've inherited, that's fun too. Whether or not it's linear perspective is really a philosophical system. We don't see like that. Even Da Vinci noticed that. He said, wait a minute. Things curve. This is not how things appear in space. And I spend some time on how we take information theory, how we construct territories that are surrogates for our visual experience Like engineers talk about a factor of noise, the static, and how we look into the static. You and I, we do this with everything, our olfactory system, our auditory system. We hear, we see, but we construct the image. We construct whatever we think is out there. It's a construction, it's not what's there. And we only see these 350 nanometers of the visual, of the electromagnetic spectrum, which is just a teeny weeny little bit. So it seems, so if that's the case, what are we seeing? How do we see? How do we look? How do we value? One of the problems with people living in New England, now the nice thing about Zoom and COVID has been that I've been able to expand my reach. So I have students from Vienna to New Zealand. That's impossible in a world without Zoom. With Zoom, this is possible. That's why we do this at 11 a.m. And then we do a webinar a month at 1 a.m. so that it's accessible to people in different time frames. Even then, it's insane for somebody in New Zealand, but we offer a free recording of every class. So what's going on to go on, I want to just show you about issues of translucence, transparency, iconic form. So are things below the surface, above the surface? What's the uniting design? In this case, it's a high horizon. That Monet will get from the Japanese, who got it from the Chinese, etc. And those are things I like to bring in, the multiculturalism, the different points of view, the broadening of the menu, and to see how we see, what do we do? How do we recognize with figure ground all the psychological principles of continuity or figure ground or similarity or any of those common fate, those basic design criteria, which anybody designing an interface for IBM or for Apple or you name the gamer are going to think about, and they're important to painters. And they're exciting because they revolutionize the way you look at your painting and how you construct the painting. So you can see here films that seem to appear over or under or brighter comes to the surface, dimmer sinks below the surface, the orientation of the shapes, that shapes seem themselves to have a certain form, a commonality, which helps them, that's the principle of similarity, a commonality that brings them together and helps you make what we call some mental anchorage, just getting some mental anchorage and giving that to the beholder so that they can make whatever hypothesis they have, the beholder's share, as Gombrich calls it, to make the picture. Never argue with the beholder, because the beholder says, I see a boat, they see a boat. They don't see what you see, they see a boat. Don't waste your breath. Okay, so I was going to show you how some of this process works.
Okay, David, before that, can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Well, first of all, as you probably guessed, I'm kind of omnivorous for different perspectives, you know, whether it's scientific or other. But if I go back in time, let's roll back the clock and enter a time machine, and there I am in a high chair at 1934 Bainbridge, and it's mid-1950s, and I am a toddler. And what am I doing? I'm in St. Louis, Missouri, and my wife is prompting me here to help you. And I'm in this high chair, and what do I notice? There's a tactile joy playing with the food. There's also the color, and I'm arranging the food, and I'm playing with the food, and I'm making these patterns and textures and interacting with the food. And, you know, we test things, you know, we don't just drop things on the floor just because it's fun to see our parents get frustrated. We drop them to see how gravity works. So I'm playing with this, and fortunately for me, grazie Dio, my mother is one who says, oh, you like to make images. You like to play like this. Let's do some finger painting. So we're flashing forward to like maybe 4th or 5th grade. I'm at a tabletop, which happens to be, what was that ubiquitous material, Rebecca? Formica. Thank you. And and she puts, we start with paint, with finger paints, and then we run out of paper. And she said, well, just do it on the tabletop. And she says to me, Davey, you're just using your hands. Use your arms. Okay. You're just using your arms, Davey. why don't you try more than that? Why don't you try your face? Why don't you try your nose? Why don't you try explore, explore, explore? So I can say I was encouraged by a mother who was unafraid of mess making, which means she was unafraid of experimentation, which is the whole basis of art, as I understand, is like that old Greek idea of have an idea, experiment, and analyze it, and off I went. And then from there, of course, then it becomes more of an academic story. You know, everything from Boy Scouts having an art merit badge, well, that was a fortunate break, or whether or not I'm off to college, where my father said, David, I know you have the same proclivities that a couple of our relatives have had, and I'm worried about it. His grandfather was an artist and a poet, and he goes, you know, that doesn't pay. As you can imagine, the phobia that parents have. And I went, okay, so I will pay for everything, David. You can take all the art courses you want, but you can't major in it, which was a brilliant idea. So I took the sciences, I loved it, language and so forth. And then when I graduated, I was liberated and could go get an MFA on my own from the Pratt Institute. And from there on, what happens, and this is what happens to many of us, because there was a whole group of really amazing artists coming out of Pratt Institute with MFAs. And I said, gosh, guys, you're showing so much promise. What happens? Well, there's attrition. People give up. And if you stay at the game, and I stayed at the game, I stayed at the table, I kept putting more on number 36 on the roulette wheel, losing, I don't care, I'm going for it. So that I don't want a full-time job. I want to be able to paint and print make and do all, and I got to work with real exciting people. So I was there meeting some of the world's interesting artists, because doing a printmaking studio, I met Arakawa, or I could meet Mayor Bearden and Louise Nevelson. We were doing their prints, and so and I would be down and having my own prints made at a place called Brand X, and they're doing. I met Erte, who told me, you live long enough, you come back again as famous. You go out of style, you come into style. And there's Rosenquist, and it was countless. And I was very fortunate. It was New York City. It was the right time, Frank Stella. And I'm seeing how people make this art and work with other artists and collaboration. And boy, does that get me excited. And especially art history got me excited. Boy, that was just the best. So I'm hoping that's giving you a little background. I opened my own art gallery, in fact, at one point, which, by the way, I lost my shirt on, but that's all right, because it was a good experiment. And it also taught me that you either have an art gallery and do the business, or you paint pictures or make images. You don't get to do both. So eventually, I'm teaching at Silvermine School of Art in New Canaan, and I'm teaching workshops in different places, and a student walks into my room. Her name is Connie Simmons. And Connie, who had helped start the Food Network and other things, said, you know, you'd be really good on TV. So she said, let's try it. Let's pitch this to PBS. And we pitched it to PBS. We did, a trial, and they said, we like this. This is good. So from there, we went to the National Conference of PBS stations and so forth, pitched it, and it went on the air as Landscapes Through Time with David Dunlop. But of course, it's really Landscapes Through Time with Connie Simmons, Rebecca Hafer, and the other people, but you get your name on there, and that's fine. Of course, why am I going to complain? So then we are shocked, because this is our first program out of the start, and we get nominated for a national Emmy.
Wow.
And I remember finding out I'm in the Metropolitan Museum, and I get the call from Connie, we're nominated. We're not only nominated for you as writer, but also for me as director. But we all did this together. We, influence one another, say, as the writing goes or the directing goes, we're doing this as a team. And I said, wow, holy cow. And then I get the next thing I know is we're invited to Los Angeles. I can't go. My brother's only daughter is having a wedding. If you don't show up to a family wedding of your brother's only daughter, you may as well hang it up. So I go to the wedding. Connie goes to Los Angeles. She says, we are up against some tough competition. Ellen DeGeneres. Do you know Ellen DeGeneres?
Yeah.
So we're up against Ellen DeGeneres and her 7 writers. There's us. But we win. And as Connie said,
wow.
they didn't know who we were before, but they know now. So the next time we do this a few years later, we try a second season. And the second season, once again, we're blown out of our socks because we're nominated for another Emmy. Well, at least we won. And I go, who are we up against? Oprah Winfrey and her special on education. And we both said, no way, no way, no way, which was true. But it was an honor to be nominated twice in multiple categories and to win. So that gives you something of the arc of how that career goes.
Great. Wow. What a story.
Yeah. It's
okay.
So much luck. I must say, so much luck.
Yeah.
Somebody walks into your room, and it's like Casablanca, of all the gin joints in all the world, she walks into mine, and that's exactly what happens. Well, at first, as I said, I wanted to give you an example of process here. I lay out the palette, I identify the colors, I show the tools, and the tools can include everything from squeegees to plastic bags to paper towels to brushes of all varying sizes. So, I mean, and remember, as I'm trying to remember who said this, all you really need are your eyes and your mind. Everything else is a tool. Da Vinci and Degas and so many others are using, and I know some ancient Chinese artists use their fingers. In fact, I met somebody, one of the current contemporary masters in China, who puts the ink in his mouth and sprays it onto the painting. And I think, oh my God, that's so exciting. So if I were to show you, again, thinking about the issue of noise, and by the way, Rebecca could pan a little bit here. She could pan from here, so you get a little flavor of the studio. When you can see here, I'm working on something here.
Oh,
and then
wow.
if she pans over here, you'll see a big city painting. Well, it's big. It's 4 feet by 4 feet, which is bigger than I can show you on this platform here.
So usually you work on larger paintings, I guess.
I do anything I've done them up to 8 by 16 feet.
Yeah, wow.
So here, and I do different materials, and the last two pieces were on an enameled aluminum composite, Dibond, Comp-Bond, Omega Bond. It's known more generally, it's like Dibond as people refer to it. But this particular piece of seashells, and you notice we're really intimate, and then again, back to that high Asian perspective. Europeans didn't know about this until they saw that artwork. And so in the 1860s. And so I'm going to embed you here and then let you scan as a vertical scan, going back to a horizon, complementary colors and so forth, but take you through the varieties of textures and patterns that you could associate and aggregate into an experience. You could say, well, that reminds me of, and you just want this associative experience of shells on a beach. And so we have, but this is on galvanized steel. So I do it on, I work on paper, I work on copper, I work on steel, I work on the aluminum, I work on anything. You can work on anything, anything works, it all offers different things. And I have a cityscape over here that was also done as a example.
What medium did you use for that one, the seashell one?
That was oil over oil over oil.
On metal surface?
On this galvanized steel. The nice thing about oil is you don't have to prepare the surface.
Right.
You just have to clean it. And I use translucent colors so that they'll show through. The substrate can offer a bounce. And so that the photons, the waves and photons, can pass through the translucent film and bounce back to the eye, which is why so many artists like to paint with thinner films of, and we, as I said, we can go back to the Tang Dynasty and see that happening. So we're here, in this case, I'm on raw rolled aluminum. I'm in Times Square, and it's a transmutation of my experience there, because nobody can do a transcription. We don't see that way, no matter, even if we talk about what they call idiot savants or others, they see only what they know to see and then recreate that. But in this case, I want a sense of motion, because you can't see my fingers moving. You see that you can't see my fingers, they don't identify singularly, but you see the blur, and the brain infers motion from blur. It infers volume from blur. As Da Vinci discovered with sfumato edges, it infers volume from a smoky edge, the word sfumato. And so here I am in Grand Central Station using a classical landscape formula, coulisses left and right, but I have blur and I have the architectural elements of Times Square, and just an inference to figures and an inference to space and an inference to folding space, taking us into this vortex, a sharp vertex down here, which is to get you to associate with an experience so that you can generate an emotional experience. It's never the information, it's always the psychological effect. I always tell people, look, you get a manual with your automobile or your camera or lots of things. You don't read it because it's boring. And you read it when you want to know how to change the clock in your car. If there's or something that comes up, oh my God, what does this mean when this pops up on the dashboard? Then you look because you're looking for information. But otherwise, we need, whether it's music, poetry, cinema, or whatever, we're looking for psychological effect. And that's what the paintings are always about. And communicating that, guys, let go of transcription, let go of translation of something. Remember, your point of view is always a biased point of view. We now know that from, that was Einstein's point. Where are you standing? So if we take that into account here, and where are you standing emotionally? What do you know? That's his flavored what you see. What's the range of vision your eyeballs are capable of, and so forth. So that's why it's so much fun to play with those ideas and the history of art. You know, I think of Cézanne, who said, I'm just going to try to reconcile biological vision with the history of art. He said, I know I didn't get there, but I have been to the mountaintop and I've seen that it could be done. And I'm kind of continuing in that vein. I like to look across global culture, whether I'm talking about Persian art or whether or not, you know that I have this fondness for Sung Dynasty art, because I've mentioned it several times, or whether or not I'm talking about Hokusai, Hiroshige, or others, that what is it that they can bring to the table that you don't know? But if you make yourself acquainted with this kind of music, this kind of food, you'll expand your horizons, you'll expand your menu, and you'll expand the possibilities for exploration. And that's what this is all about. It's not what you're painting, it's how you're painting. It's not, it really is the journey. It's really not the destination. If you have an expectation, you're going to be disappointed, because those expectations are far more, they're like dreams. If you try to tell the dream, you realize how fungible it really is. It's so porous, it starts to disappear, but then you provide the words anyway, and you ended up making a story. And that's what happens with the painting. So as Picasso said, follow the paint, or Da Vinci, let go of your original intentions, and then let's see what can unfold on the basis of what you've acquired as information or knowledge, whether or not that is looking at Edo Japan, or whether or not that's looking at Ming China, or whether or not that's looking at Sufi Turkey or Persia.
Here's the workshop finder. So we click on art workshops, and here's the year-round programs first, then in monthly order, April. Okay.
What an exciting array.
Oh, here is the familiar face. Okay, so Dave's workshop on April 28th.
Right, well, that's a one-day webinar. Every Tuesday we do a workshop, and every Saturday we do 3 Saturdays and 3 Tuesdays per month. And then the last week of the month, Wednesday, we do a webinar. On the Tuesdays and Saturdays, I not only do the demonstration, and here's a panel of one of the demonstrations I did. I put the palette up here. I do designs. I do here's one I just did Wednesday, so I happen to have it here. But following that, I say, all right, we're going to clear the table here. in 1 minute, we're going to begin the critique. So if anybody sent in a picture that they want me to critique, so it's voluntary. And if you want me to critique the painting, I pull up and Connie puts up the list of people so you know where you are on the list. But everybody watches everybody. I am always so surprised. They stay till the end. And we have a personal consultation because remember, this is just between you and me. That's all it is. It's just you and me. And so I do this critique and I say, you know, I think we could do something with your composition. I think maybe we could put a glaze over here, or maybe your perspective is off, so your river looks like it's going uphill and you want it to go into the scene. So and with drawing tools, digital drawing tools, I can work on top of their work and not really work on their work. They take a screenshot, or they can wait to see the streaming recording whenever they want, which is up about 3 days later or 2 days. And I go from person to person for every party who wants a personal critique, working with them on their picture using not only digital drawing tools, but also the conversation. What were you trying to do? What were you thinking? What's on your mind? And that's something we do with every class. Okay. Except the webinar, which is all demonstrations, but it's multiple types of media,
right?
Mixed media, etc.
Wow.